So this is the place where I think the introduction to sociology takes its first major corner. Um, it usually is here after we've done a lot of this description of the social structure. And even as we talked about formal organizations, I introduced what it means for something to be an ideal type. In some ways, we've set up an ideal type of society. When we talk about the structure, our statuses, our roles, our groups and our organizations. And even though we haven't specifically talked about those social institutions one by one, we certainly have talked about them as agents of socialization, the family, the education system, religion, um, the economy, the government, health and medicine, the media. All of those are social institutions. So far, we've kind of painted this picture already of what society is and how we can understand our society or any other society around us. And in some ways, we've painted this ideal type. If you put all this stuff in order and press go, then you should have a pretty functioning society. You've thought about a lot of those things. But this is the place where we talk about deviance. And deviance is important because, again, an ideal type is sort of an aspirational model, a general understanding or a description of something. But the truth is that you're never going to get it. You're never going to get the ideal. Even in organizations, there's always going to be a reason why you have some things look one way versus the other. There is always going to be variation. There are so many societies in the world at the current time and over time that they're never the same, even if we can find these commonalities across them. There's lots of variation. And so what are some examples of deviance, for instance? We talked very early about formal and informal norms. So when we think about folkways, you can find deviance if someone doesn't cover their mouth when they cough. General everyday behavior. We expect somebody to cover their mouth when they cough. If they don't, they're being deviant in that folk way. In their mores, literally, if you murder somebody, you've been deviant in terms of those moral expectations of your behavior. And if you do that, then you also break formal laws, formal norms. You break the law. You've been deviant in that way. So for all of those norms that we've understood, informal norms, folkways and mores, and formal norms, those things that we formalize and write down and put in codes and law books and things like that. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about deviance. Deviance is anything that is a violation of a established contextual, cultural, or social norm. It can be a folkway, it can be a moray, it can be a codified law. And it's important for you to recognize that deviance doesn't have to be illegal, right? And importantly so, deviance isn't even always a bad thing, right? Because if you are expected to be the person culturally, when you see somebody doing something they're not supposed to be, culturally, you might be expected to mind your business and not say anything. The deviant thing to do would be to stand up and say something. We're sort of trying to change the culture about that when we say things like, see something, say something, because the more normal thing to do would be to say nothing, be quiet. In our culture, stay out of it. It has nothing to do with you. To be deviant in that case is to do something that goes against those cultural norms or those general social expectations of your behavior and to do the opposite. So deviance isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes deviance can be location or circumstance specific or even time bound, right? It used to be deviant to have a whole lot of tattoos, right? It used to be deviant or it can be deviant just based in space. If I am here at Rock Valley College and you are in my classroom, I can tell you that I need you to take a seat, for instance. But if we are at the theater At the Coronado, for instance, I don't necessarily get to say, I need you to take a seat because we don't have that same kind of relationship there. I'm just a patron and so are you. So your deviant behavior or my deviant behavior in that case, what we consider to be deviant about our behavior is spacebound. Standing up at a concert while you watch the show is very different than standing up at the AMC theater while you watch the show. So it's not standing up as a participant or an audience member, it's standing up in particular audiences, right? And again, it's circumstantial, it's cultural, it's time bound, it's sort of, it has a lot of reasons as to why something is deviant. When we have this conversation about deviant, there's a couple things that I want to point out or terms that I want to make sure I'm pointing out. And I don't know why I'm trying to do it that way. So let me open up my whiteboard. There are two things that I want you to keep in mind. One of them is this idea of social control, and the other is social order. All societies practice social control. And the reason why all societies practice social control is because the underlying goal of social control is to maintain social order. Let me give you these definitions. Social control in your book is defined as the regulation and enforcement of norms. Of course, as a society, we want to make sure that people follow the norms. There's a lot of expectations that we have in all of our statuses. And more importantly, again, we are part of other people's role sets. I need you to do your part so that I can do my part. We've come together as a society and come up with all these rules as to how we're going to do things, what you're supposed to do versus what I'm supposed to do. And of course, we want to make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to do. Because if you let it run amok, again, there's variation. There's always going to be variation. There's always going to be some amount of deviance. So every single society will practice social control, social order. And the reason why they're practicing social control is in order to maintain social order. My words are all over the place. All societies practice social control because the underlying goal of social control is to maintain social order. Social control is the regulation and enforcement of norms. Social order is the arrangement of practices and behaviors on which society members base their daily lives. We need order because if my status as mother says that I'm supposed to do these 10 things, for instance, we're not going to be very successful if I wake up on a Tuesday and there's a whole other set of 10 things that I'm supposed to be doing. I need what's expected of me for the most part to remain still. I need to be able to know what is the order of this institution and what part do I play. Think about the conversation we were just having about organizations and bureaucracies and the division of labor. I need to be able generally to depend on the fact that if this is my job, these are the things that I'm expected to do. And not only do I need to depend on that, but you need to depend on that too, because you need to know what your job is. But remember, we were talking about statuses and roles, that we have a status and that our role is the expectation of our status, for instance, the behavior that we have, that there's some distinction between the expectation of our behavior and what it is we actually do. So there's always going to be some variation. Some would say just at that level, there's always going to be some deviance. We're always going to do something slightly different than what we're expected to do for whatever reason, either because we decided today we're just not going to do it, or because today we just don't have the capacity, or maybe I was just 5 minutes late. I did something that is deviant, that's not really what was expected of me. So in order to keep you from doing that, the social control might be, if you show up more than this many minutes late, we're going to dock your pay. That's a social control measure because I am trying to practice some kind of social control to make sure that everybody does what they're supposed to do because I've got to maintain social order. I've got to do that all the way on the level of siblings who share a bedroom, all the way at the family level. I have to do that in schools. I have to do that in the government. I have to do that in the economy. Every one of our institutions, every one of our groups and organizations, all of the relationships that we have some amount of social control built into it. So, how do we enforce social norms? Well, we've got some internal ways that we do that. Internally, we do that for the most part because we internally accept our status and roles. We internalize what those statuses are. I know that I'm this, and so I know that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. That's what the socialization process is. I need you to know what this is because you're going to be expected to do it. We accept that. We accept those statuses and what is expected of us. And for the most part, we go along with it. We are either put in groups or we voluntarily join groups. We are ascribed statuses or we achieve them, the ones that we want. And we generally are good people. So we keep ourselves in line. And we care about what our significant others would say and those generalized others. Again, the generalized other is just some understanding of the overall expectations of our behavior that we get from society. So sometimes we practice social control with these internal enforcements. We just tend to be good people in society trying to do the best that we can. Are we going to be deviant a little bit? Of course, but we generally will keep it the way that we're supposed to. Sometimes that enforcement is external. And we've talked about that in terms of those sanctions. Sometimes those sanctions are sometimes those sanctions are informal. Your mom will give you a bad look when you're not doing something that you're supposed to do, or your friends will, tap you on the back when they've noticed that you were doing something that's great. Those are informal sanctions to congratulate you or discourage behavior. Sometimes those sanctions are formal. If you do something that you're supposed to do that's positive in a formal way, then you will earn whatever that reward is. If you do something that is negative in a formal way, then you will earn what that punishment is. This is where we start to make the distinction between deviance and crime. It's these external formal sanctions that come with not doing what we're supposed to do. Remember, we said when we talk about these norms, these are the things that you must do or else, right? Or else you receive the sanctions. And those sanctions, when it comes to formal norms or laws, when you don't do those, then you have committed a crime. It is one of the clearest examples that we have in society of social control, and it's used to enforce social order. One of the clearest examples of social control used to enforce social order is a society's legal code. By definition, it's the rules adopted and enforced by some political authority. It's the sergeant at arms in your formal organization. It's the police force in your city. It's the Constitution. It's the set of bylaws. Whoever is designated in those formal codes tell you what is okay to do and what's not okay to do. It's the student code of conduct at Rock Valley College. It's the security force at Rock Valley College that is there to practice social control to maintain social order. You can internally enforce those things yourself by simply doing what you're supposed to do. If you don't, there is some external enforcement of those things that will nicely say hello to you when you don't do the things that you're supposed to do because you've committed what we understand to be a crime. It's a crime because you broke the law. It's a crime because you went against the legal code. It's a crime because the legal code is there to maintain social control in order to keep social order. And the law is any of those norms that we decided to formally write down. Okay? So when we're talking deviance, we're talking about, think of the word, any deviation from what was expected of you, any deviation from the norm. It can be informal or it can be formal. And we do that because we want to maintain order in society. When you don't internally enforce those norms, you keep yourself in line, you do what you're supposed to do, you deviate in menial ways, and you get back on track. When you don't do that internally, then you are faced with what happens externally. And one of the ways that we externally maintain social control in a society with the goal of maintaining social order is we create these legal forces of authority whose job is to keep us in order. That's why when we're talking about formal norms, we're talking about laws. And when we're talking about deviation against formal norms or laws, that's when we talk about crime. All deviance isn't crime, but all crime is deviant. Your book gives you a lot of discussion about different types of crime: violent crime, non-violent crime, corporate crime, hate crime, street crime, victimless crime. It's worth knowing the distinctions of those things because those types of crime, again, are deviations against very specific formalized norms. And then your book also gives you some description about what the criminal justice system is. If you understand what crime is as it relates to deviance, then you will understand that the criminal justice system is that form of social control dealing with people who have committed a crime. The police are responsible for enforcing the law and that social control in order to maintain order at the federal, state, and community level. The court is the system that has the authority to decide whether or not somebody has actually broken the law or not. And the correction system is that group that will supervise and be responsible for you for people who've been arrested, convicted, or sentenced for whatever that crime is, plus detaining people or watching them or taking care of them while they're waiting on their trial or their procedure or whatever it is. So the criminal justice system is just the process by which one has to sort of deal with or face up to the external social control that has the goal of maintaining social order in a society because someone has been deviant as it relates to those formal social norms, which we understand to be laws, which means you've committed a crime. This is where our distinction between deviance and crime goes. Thank you for watching.